Can you guys see them yet? Sorry about the lights. All right, so throughout the course of my presentation, I hope to weave together these words into what I think is a somewhat coherent progression of thoughts, but we'll see if you get that by the end. First, I want to just tell you a few things about myself. I'm an extremely passionate, creative, dedicated, ambitious, and intense leader. I'm also a pretty passionate eater. I didn't put a cupcake up here today because I love cupcakes, though I do. I put a cupcake up here today because I want you to think about how cute and even sexy cupcakes have become, right? We'll go to Sweet and Harvard Square and we'll shell out $5 for one cupcake. Well, leadership is similarly as sexy. We invest so much time, energy, and resources in teaching our students to be young leaders. We have leadership classes, leadership conferences, leadership awards, but what is leadership actually, and how do we teach it? So this cupcake is made of pretty basic ingredients, right? Flour, sugar, eggs, butter. When assembled correctly, they form a nice cakey base and a fluffy frosting topping. Now I want you to take a second and imagine biting into this cupcake. You'll need a napkin or 10 because you'll have green frosting all over your face and the cupcake's base will crumble and stick to your clothes. Eating a cupcake, as pretty as it is very messy. So is dissecting leadership. Leaders start with similar basic elements: intellect, a team, objectives, resources, and we expect them to assemble those elements into a project that looks as cute and sexy on the outside as this little cupcake. The truth is, leaders are constantly cleaning up messes that they make. They're always struggling to trust their intellect, to motivate their teams, to achieve objectives, and to make use of limited resources. Which brings me to my next idea: professionalism. Good leaders exhibit professionalism. They draw on their team's core competencies to overproduce, meaning they take those same ingredients, sugar, flour, eggs, butter, and they make more. Especially strong leaders are able to draw together their teams to encourage people to combine assets so that they have a greater potential than any one individual would have on his or her own. Teaching leaders to become better leaders starts with changing how they think about leadership. Leaders have to realize that they can take these same elements, intellect, resources, team, objectives, and create more than one outcome, some more favorable than others. Let's think about donuts. Donuts have basically the same ingredients as cupcakes, right? But we see donuts very differently. They play a very different role in our eating habits. It's acceptable for us to eat a donut with our cup of coffee, while we don't usually eat a cupcake for breakfast. Similarly, we don't stick birthday candles in donuts, we stick them in cupcakes. And we're willing to shell out $5, like I said, for a fancy cupcake when we can buy nearly a dozen donuts for that much. So why the difference? Well, a similar thing happens with social entrepreneurship. We see consumerism, capitalism, a global economy, free markets come together to create for-profit ventures and nonprofit ventures. We have regular entrepreneurship, which is the basic daily commerce that we see, where for-profit ventures sell goods and make profit. And then we have social entrepreneurship, which throws another ingredient into the mix: saving some part of the world, right? Social entrepreneurship uses capitalism and commercialism to leverage global social change. Now, this makes social entrepreneurship messy, because whenever you add saving the world to a leader's agenda, their work suddenly doubles. So let's think about social entrepreneurship a little bit more. Under social entrepreneurship, we have for-profit ventures. An example is World of Good. World of Good is a company that empowers women in third world nations to use their skills as artisans to create those cultural products that we see in Starbucks and Whole Foods that say, "With love from Ghana," "Made in Kenya," "From India." Similarly, we have nonprofits under social entrepreneurship. Now, nonprofits use donations to fund programming that supposedly addresses social pandemics like HIV/AIDS, poverty, education in third world countries, or water sanitation. One of those nonprofits is called Minga. Minga is an organization that my friends and I founded 3 years ago. So our founding story is a little odd. One day, a friend of ours came back from traveling around the world. Her name is Katie Simon. And Katie told us that she had pledged $5,000 to build a rehabilitation center in the Philippines. And at the time, I didn't really know Katie well. I just knew some of her friends. And I had no idea what the child sex trade was, but I knew I wanted to learn a little bit more. So I did some research, and I found out that the average age of entry into prostitution in our country was 13. And to me, that was just horrifying because I was 13 at the time. So Minga came together, and we're called Minga because the word Minga means the coming together of a community for the betterment of all in Quechua, which is an indigenous language of Ecuador. So at the start of Minga, we weren't a community at all. We were a group of passionate, idealists, and pretty much naive youth who came together and said, we're going to have a yard sale and raise $5,000. And you know what our parents said? They were like, yeah, you guys are crazy. You have fun having a bake sale. And we were like, no, we're really going to do this. And everyone told us we were insane, but we piled wedding dresses and sofas and games and books into a house, and we sold it, and we made $6,500 in our first day. And that's when this idea of empowerment started. My freshman year in high school at Newton South, I planned a $10,000 fundraising event for Minga. My sophomore year, I auctioned off over $30,000 worth of artwork for Minga. So this idea that we were too young just wasn't really going so well for everyone around us. So before I get into the more technical underpinnings of Minga, I need you to understand the gravity of wait until you're older. This is probably the most enraging phrase that I've ever heard. It's kind of the story of my life is defying this. So everyone told us, you know, wait until you're older. But if I had waited until I was older, I wouldn't be the skilled leader I am today. In fact, Minga's entire brand wouldn't exist. We're a nationally acclaimed group of young people because we're young. If we were adults in the nonprofit world doing what we're doing now, we wouldn't actually be that accomplished because our organization's already 4 years old. We're expected to be doing everything that we're doing. It's only special because we are young. I want to bring this back to Newton North for a second. Again, we invest in leadership classes, leadership courses, leadership conferences, but people in our community still tell kids to wait until they're older to do things. So I ask, what's the point of teaching this knowledge if we don't let kids use it? When we tell kids to wait, we tell them that whatever work they think they may bring to our community is valueless. So we have to trust kids. If we want them to make a positive difference, we have to put some responsibility in their hands. Now, I understand this is scary because as teenagers, we have underdeveloped brains and we have a constant need for attention, which sometimes gets the better of us. But before you tell our generation to wait until we're older, you need to meet us. Meet the millennials, kids ages 18 to 24. We have a $200 billion spending power, and 89% of us are engaged in some type of philanthropy. We're defined by our perpetual need to stay connected, our need to be productive, our need to achieve, our need to stand out while fitting in, and finally, an overwhelming sense of optimistic self-entitlement that's generation-wide. Jessica Reed works at Resource Interactive. It's a company that offers consumer insights to Fortune 500 companies while they're making their marketing plans. Jessica conducted primary research on the millennials and found that our spending behaviors correlate a lot with our generational characteristics that I just mentioned. With our collective identity in mind, let's move back to Minga. Here are Minga's leaders in Guatemala. They're working with children who are victims of the child sex trade and living at a rehabilitation center there. Now, I don't know about you, but if I had been a victim of the child sex trade and adults came in speaking no English and were like, hey, get on my back, let's go on a piggyback ride, I would be terrified. But because Minga's leaders are kids, we can get away with things like this, which brings me back to this idea of brand. Our entire brand is our youth. We're built around this idea that we're able to achieve what everyone around us says is impossible, and people only say it's impossible because we're young. Continuing with Minga's brand, and our speaking figures and fundraising totals aside, we're just kind of abnormal. So last year, many of us were being normal teenagers and getting our driving permits and learning how to drive with our parents. And so one meeting, we started talking about this idea of going on a road trip together. We thought it sounded really fun, and we thought we could speak along the way, maybe teach some kids about the issue. And much to our parents' dismay, we kind of weren't willing to let the idea go. So we came home from a meeting again, and our parents always fear what happens after meetings. And so we said, we're going to go on a road trip this summer. We're going to spend 4 weeks in a car that we're going to get donated, and then we're going to spray paint, and we're going to speak to kids all around the United States. And they were like, once again, you guys are crazy. We're not letting 6 teenagers drive a car for 4 weeks. Just go back to your meeting. But we didn't let the idea go. So we spent 3 months, we planned speeches in 10 cities, and then we got this car donated and we painted it. And the 5 of us drove 4,000 miles for 4 weeks. We spoke to over 400 kids in small groups. So this is Katie, Ben, Sarah, Ellie, and I, and we make up Minga's core group. And it wasn't really until our road trip this summer that we realized that we are leaders of one of the largest youth-run nonprofits in the world. And in that position, we're quite powerful. So I spent 100 hours with these kids in the car over the summer, and at the time that was way too much time. But it really started, it got me thinking, and that's when my SYP started. So I started thinking about Minga's brand, which you'll hear me say this word brand a lot, and it's kind of our image, but with like a marketing twist. So we kept going to these speeches, and I was wondering, well, how do these kids see us? Are we cool? Are we badass? Are we preppy white kids driving a car? And thinking about our brand led to a more full-out evaluation of our organization. So when we returned, I called for our annual meeting, which lasted 20 hours straight, and we restructured Minga. We just tore it apart. We said everything we're doing isn't actually effective. So we narrowed our mission, we created programs that directly serve kids in the United States, and we started planning for our succession, because as seniors in high school, we knew we were all leaving soon. So continuing this idea of brand, I want to turn to one of the most effective ones, Nike. Now, the Nike brand tells teenagers to just do it. Just yesterday, I saw kids in North sitting with this written on their shirt. Nike's brilliant. They get kids to advertise all the time. But they don't get kids to wear these shirts because they spend millions on marketing, which they do. I think it's a more intrinsic value in Nike that makes the brand so appealing to teenagers. How often do we hear someone telling us, just do it, just go for it? This is the bold and creative leadership that kids want to follow. So in my SYP this spring, I've had to work to build Minga's brand to be this type of empowering and resonating message with teenagers. We're working to empower 2 million kids to take action against the child sex trade. Already we have a little step up, because as Nancy Lublin, CEO of Do Something, which is an organization based in New York working to empower teenagers as well, Nancy Lublin in her TED Talk says, "I founded a nonprofit" is the sexiest phrase. And I didn't know until recently, but she's right. Even at crowds at Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Duke, when I was there for visiting weekend, this phrase got me attention instantly. So I started thinking, why? Why is it so cool to start a nonprofit? Why do we even have nonprofits? If you think about it, it sounds stupid because nonprofits are great and they help communities and they improve everyone's lives. But think about it this way. Nonprofits sell nothing, they make no profit, and they're expected to change the world. It's kind of unreasonable, right? I mean, for-profits have so much more resources to try and do the same thing. So I asked myself, well, why am I, an accomplished leader, working for a nonprofit? Why don't I go and work for a business? And the answer is pretty simple. It's because I love what I do. It's meaningful work, and I can't imagine doing anything different. But I wanted to make sure that what I was doing and what was meaningful to me was actually meaningful. So I started asking myself, well, how do I know that Minga's effective? And that's when I kind of turned to the for-profit sector, and I remembered Cold Stone Creamery and JP Licks in Newton Center. I don't know how many of you remember, but Cold Stone came in and they said, hey, we're going to boot this little local ice cream store out of business. Unfortunately for Cold Stone's leadership, they were very wrong, because our consumer base preferred the JP Licks brand and JP Licks ice cream, so that Cold Stone Creamery is no longer in business. Unfortunately, Darwin's law of survival of the fittest for for-profits doesn't really apply to the nonprofit world. Nonprofits suffer an overpopulation. We have a redundancy epidemic through our missions. Everyone's working to accomplish the same things, but no one will work together. And nonprofits do compete. People say, well, no one drives another nonprofit out of business. Sure, but we compete for money. We compete for impressions, views by a certain demographic. We compete for press, and we compete for volunteers. We compete all the time. And the truth is that we can be way more effective if we work together. So last week I attended a conference at Harvard on social entrepreneurship and nonprofit management, and I brought up this idea, faster. There are a few exceptions. Things like school booster clubs or sports organizations should be kept at the local level. But for the most part, organizations like Minga are perfect for merging. Now, that said, we all have a particular loyalty to our nonprofit and happen to think it's the best one, so why would we merge? So I didn't really want to merge Minga with a bigger organization and have it kind of disintegrate. So I said, okay, well, if we're not going to merge, then Minga needs to stop contributing to this epidemic of mission redundancy. So we need to change our mission and make sure that it's narrow and focused and that we're the only ones doing it. And now we are the only youth-run nonprofit in the country working to prevent kids in the United States from becoming involved in the trade as victims or abusers. We started our Let's Get Real campaign. The idea came when we started thinking about the root causes of child prostitution in our country. We looked at domestic violence, sexual abuse in the home, and the media. And we said, okay, well, as much as we'd love to, we're never going to be able to end all domestic violence. We're never going to be able to stop sexual abuse in homes, because that's just out of our league and we don't have the capacity. What we can do is combat the messages in the media that portray kids as sex objects. If we look through Teen Vogue, we see American Apparel or Abercrombie & Fitch modeling 12-year-old girls in lingerie saying, look, isn't she sexy? All of a sudden there's this culture of promiscuity, and it's just coming at teens who are younger and younger. And that's what's making it okay for the boys in our generation to grow up and justify sleeping with a girl as their sex tourist in another country. So we said, let's expose the realities of the child sex trade. Let's show kids in our country what we really see our future generation being involved in. And I doubt for very many kids it's as child prostitutes or as sexual exploiters. So Let's Get Real has one mission: to empower 2 million teenagers to take action against the child sex trade. Now, I keep throwing around these words, take action, and you're probably wondering, well, what action can kids actually take to end the child sex trade? It's a completely valid question. The whole idea of harnessing the millennials' drive and potential and their constant connectivity through internet and Facebook and all other types of social media is what drove us to realize that we have to educate the millennials before they can act. They're the future. They're the ones who are going to be involved in law enforcement and politics and business. So right now, we have to reach them while they're still willing to listen. Obviously, reaching 2 million is quite an ambitious goal. We chose it because 2 million kids are exploited every year, so we thought if we could send that message that we have one youth leader for every child exploited, wouldn't that be a powerful movement? So we started to achieve it through 3 main programs. We have Minga's speaking program, Minga's club program, and Minga's public service announcement campaign. The speaking and clubs program are pretty self-explanatory. We give speeches, and then we help kids start Minga clubs. I direct Minga's public service announcement campaign, which is our largest campaign ever with an over $100,000 budget. Its timeline is just over 2 years, and I started it in the fall, and it's basically all I've been doing for my senior year project. Obviously, something so time-consuming requires some assistance, so I hired a full-time staff. Her name is Amy. She's a college graduate. And oddly enough, Amy has been the hardest part of my senior year project. Managing her is fine. She's a lovely person. But Amy's in line to replace me next year, which means that I basically have to dump everything from my brain that I've learned over the past 3 years into her. To do that, I've started writing a guide to nonprofit management specifically about Minga. It's slotted to be over 100 pages long, which is just scary. But it will serve as a powerful reference tool for Amy next year. So as part of Minga's PSA campaign, these are the phases. We have design, preparation, execution, and evaluation. This is typically how we conduct any Minga campaign. The design phase for the PSA campaign was absolutely daunting. When I submitted my SYP proposal, I had quite the optimistic timeline. I had us already producing the PSA by now, and we were dealing with Oprah's press calls. Not exactly happening yet, but it's still scheduled to. So we started with a strategic plan. I realized that unlike any other Minga projects where people said, no, you can't do this, this one we might not actually be able to do. So we had better do our research before we jumped into it and invested all this time and money. So I talked with a woman named Kathleen McInnes. She's a producer in Hollywood. She specializes in full films and PSAs. And she told us there was about a 10% chance of us finding a production company to produce our first PSA. So as soon as we heard 10%, we were like, hey, we're Minga. We do the impossible, so let's do it. So we did. We actually partnered with an organization, production company called Causework, LLC. They specialize in producing public service announcements with celebrity advocates. But we still knew we needed that research. So I worked with Amy and my intern at the time, Danielle, to create a 150-page strategic plan. Here's its table of contents. It outlines everything from our mission to campaign style to celebrity involvement, and then this lovely section of appendices actually outlines every potential celebrity partner, corporate partner, foundation that we'd like to request funding from. So anyway, so this was a really important document, not only because of its content, but because it provided an official source of leadership accountability. It's really important to Minga's organization that we stay on mission. So many nonprofits get caught up in opportunities that are completely irrelevant to their mission, and once you do that, you're not really serving the community you claim to serve. So we understood the importance of narrowing our focus and keeping everything on track with this strategic plan. Oh. You know what? Sorry. This plan also enabled us to build a team of advisors and helped me build a closer relationship with Amy and my intern. At the time, I was still getting used to managing people who were 10+ years older than myself, which is still weird. But creating that plan was really a great way for us to bond and to understand the daily work that they'd be doing for Minga. All right, following the completion of our strategic plan, we realized that we needed to create several stock proposals, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but each one is 20 or 30 pages. Ours were for funding, like foundations, because many of them ask the same questions over and over, corporate stock proposals, media outreach plans, And so we had all of the production side of our PSA campaign set by March. What we lacked was funding. It's what everyone always lacks. And we didn't even have enough to get started on our pre-production services. So Nancy Lublin at Do Something, I gave her a call and I said, what can we do now to get $30,000? And she said, well, why don't you compete for the Pepsi Refresh Everything grant, which was a disaster, but we did. So we competed for the Pepsi Refresh Everything grant, and I was really excited because we had stayed in the top 10 in this competition for most of the time, and then we slipped to 13th, and I was just crushed because we invested 90% of our collective time and resources into trying to win this grant, and it didn't happen. But we did make some very important connections along the way, which kind of brings me to my next point of nonprofit networking. So last year, I was awarded the 7 Days Across America Most Encouraging Teen Award, which probably means nothing to you, and honestly, at the time, it didn't mean anything to me. But the founder of the Let's Encourage Foundation happens to be Andrew Baker, who's a professor at Harding University in Texas. And Andrew was someone I contacted asking to help secure more votes for the Pepsi competition. And last fall, he flew me down to New York for this award ceremony, and he filmed me for a documentary called What's Right with the American Teenager. They work to combat the negative messages that we see in the media that are always saying that teenagers are only good at drugs and alcohol, which we're not. So I was in this documentary, I didn't think much of it, and then a few weeks ago I had a phone call with Andrew, and he said, MTV, AMC Theaters, Comcast, and ABC Family are buying the documentary. And MTV has requested that you, being me, represent Minga on a television show next summer. Southwest Airlines is going to pay for you to fly around for 2 weeks, going to premieres of this documentary at 14 theaters in the fall. And I can't disclose details of the MTV stunt, but what will get me to do it is that there'll be a $7.5 million ad campaign for Minga and a chance to testify before Congress and Obama at the end. So I said, all right, I'll consider it. So that was the start of that. And then we kind of turned back to our strategic plan and we said, okay, well now we have that great opportunity coming, but that's not really bringing us money. So we returned to the strategic plan and we applied for over $60,000 worth of grants and foundation funding. Now unfortunately, most foundations don't like to fund nonprofits that deal with sexual exploitation simply because tracing actual results in sexual exploitation is quite hard to do. I mean, you can't like count the number of kids who you prevent from entering. So we focus Minga's brand more on this idea of youth education and youth empowerment, which also broadens our ability to partner with corporations. Now, as many of you read my abstract, you know that my paper was on cause marketing. Cause marketing is kind of an interesting idea. It's a new marketing phenomenon. It started in 1983 with the American Express campaign to restore the Statue of Liberty. Cause marketing is basically a type of for-profit and nonprofit sector collaboration in which a for-profit company offers its resources and a nonprofit offers its brand, and together they increase profit for the company and increase impact for the nonprofit. So we turned to cause marketing. We said, all right, we're renovating our website, we're redesigning our speeches, we have new programming, we just got an office, we have staff. We're finally at almost the level where we can look at corporate partnerships, which are legally binding and typically reserved for larger nonprofits. But we said, okay, we're about to enter this stage. So we turned to the technology sector. Oops. We started looking at at companies like Cisco Communications. We said, we want 2 million kids to submit little film clips about the child sex trade to our website so that we can amplify the youth voice and send this message that our generation is just not for sale. So partnering with a communications firm or a technology company makes a lot of sense, because what if we had some technology company that manufactures videos and that's video cameras and that's marketing towards teens? What if we had them send every kid who wants to make a little film clip a video camera? So that's when we turned to Flip. Flip is the newest hot product. It controls 17% of a $2.4 billion camcorder industry already, and it only emerged 2 years ago. I actually met the founder of the company at the Clinton Global Initiative Conference and was like, yeah, you're crazy, what is this little thing? And now it's out everywhere. So we started looking at Flip, and we worked with CauseWork to create a joint letter pitching Minga's PSA campaign. Our ideal scenario is that they'll fund the first public service announcement and then offer the Flip video camcorders as prizes for kids who submit PSAs to our website. This sounds crazy, but we spend a lot of time trying to get meetings. So CauseWork LLC is working with us to actually get someone from the Flip corporate office in a room, which is just nearly impossible. So that kind of brings me to the next point. Often, who you meet in the nonprofit world determines who you get to meet with. So I spent a lot of time this spring going to philanthropy events and going to community dinners and attending award ceremonies, not because I love them, I mean they're fun, but because who you meet at these things, someone like Andrew Baker, determines huge opportunities that can be real game changers for your organization. Going on that idea of unpredictability, a quick anecdote. A few weeks ago, I was flown out to speak in Wisconsin. Now, I'd spoken at a Rotary Club. If any of you have ever been to a Rotary Club, it's quite the interesting experience. I was flown out to speak at a Rotary Club over the summer to a group of very wealthy adults in Chicago. And the idea was that they would be new donors for Minga. So I said, okay, I'll go. And instead of getting money, they said, hey, why don't you speak at our National Youth Conference? And I was like, oh, all right. Is it at a country club? And so then they flew me out there this spring, and it was actually at a camp. And I was just shocked because you had all of these really wealthy people's children at this camp, and there were 130 of them, and they were supposed to be engaged in leadership development for 3 days. So I get there, and I'm like, all right, this is kind of ridiculous. So I start my speech with the 50 Cent PIMP video, and I think I was as unpredictable as the event. But I found myself speaking along best-selling author Mia Fontaine. That's Mia. Mia is a noted activist and author. As a child, she was trafficked. She was also involved in drugs. Her mom ended up kidnapping her. She has this amazing story. And I found myself speaking with Mia, and I was like, all right, this event just continues to get more unpredictable. And then I met the event's coordinator, Sean Nelson. And Sean has been organizing RYLA, which is the acronym for Rotary Youth Leadership Awards, for the last 8 years. And at first I was like, all right, Sean, you and I have very different jobs. Yes, we both manage nonprofits, but like you deal with rowdy kids and needy speakers and transportation issues. And I just don't do that. So I don't know, I didn't really see much relevance in learning from Sean. And then I started to look at how Sean handled unpredictable situations. And I realized that his entire team expected him to handle these situations with confidence and logic, even though some of them were just ridiculous. I mean, he'd have speakers who wouldn't eat the dinner because it wasn't expensive enough. It was just kind of absurd. So I was like, all right, this is clearly a valuable lesson, because I learned that as a leader of a nonprofit, you're only successful if you can actually thrive off of unpredictability. You're not expected just to cope with it. That doesn't really do. You can't just go and cry about it. You have to turn unpredictable challenges into opportunities. All right, so I hope I've made a little bit more sense of these words. My understanding of leadership, professionalism, and social entrepreneurship is still very incomplete. I still have a lot to learn. My project was not supposed to be done by this time. Next year, I'll be attending Harvard University, close by to the Minga office still. Minga last week actually had our last meeting as a core group. We've dissolved our core group and are founding a new board of directors. I hope to be elected the chairman of the board, we'll see, where I'll oversee our new executive director, who will be a full-time graduate